I'm live. Okay, here we go. Just as always, I have to find you on Substack because I loves me some Substackers. Okay, but it's also on delay, so I won't see you guys for just a minute. Wait, yes. There we are. Look, it's meta. We're in both places. Hi, guys. Happy Friday. I am rested and caffeinated, so watch out. It's a sunny, beautiful day where I live, which we have had 2.5 feet of snow / 3.5 feet of snow and drifts. We have had 80 degrees. We had tornado warnings, and then we had back to 20 degrees. And now it feels like a normal spring day, but I shall not hold my breath because who knows what could happen. Okay, I am surrounded by notes today, by the way. I have my little tiny notes, and then I was like, hey guys, we're going to talk about some Trump accusations just to clarify where we're coming from. Why do we focus on the guy? Guys, Trump accusations, single-spaced, front and back. Okay, let's start at the beginning. Hi, I'm Ellie Leonard. I'm mainly a Substacker, but I'm moving all through the social media space. I have my YouTube up and running, which I didn't realize that it wasn't up and running, that I had to verify stuff, that I had to get little postcards in the mail to prove that I'm a real person. I am indeed a real person. I have a Twitch as of this afternoon. I'm all over the place. I'm on Substack. I'm on social media that I abhor and don't like. I'm on platforms that I really do like. I'm just everywhere. So you can find me, under the Panicked Writer. You can find me under Red Pencil Script, which is my transcription business. And I am here with Blue Ant Media, sporting my New Kids on the Block. I don't know if you guys were around for them. I was very tiny. I remember step by step playing on the intercom at the grocery store when I was tiny. And that is like my only memory of them. But I got this at a vintage festival with my husband, and I really like it. Today, as with always, we are exploring the world of what I call citizen journalism. And I don't really know where I land in the world of journalism. I've talked with several fairly legitimate journalists and lawyers about what it is to be a journalist. Like, is it that you have a journalism degree? Is it that you worked in a newspaper? Is that this is your whole experience? Or is it this kind of space that we're moving through right now where journalism has become independent? And then what does that look like? Who's a journalist there? And so we have this idea of independent journalism, which you see a lot on Substack, you see a lot on YouTube. You think of things like Midas Touch and Blue Ant Media, and you think of like Jim Acosta and all these folks that have moved out of legacy journalism into sort of this independent space. But then you have this other step into the world of citizen journalism, and that is just the idea of how capable all of us are at solving some of these investigations, or helping, or compiling information, or working together in this kind of collaborative space. Crowdsourcing, right? We're in a huge crowdsourcing moment in history that couldn't be placed any better than the Epstein files. That is such a moment for more eyeballs and more brains and more hearts to be involved. And I think it's made a lot of people realize their purpose, right? Like I was looking for a purpose. I had a small business that was kind of shuttering because of AI. And I was like, I don't just want to go to a job where I'm clocking in and clocking out. Like, I want to do something that's purposeful, that does something in the world. And I was reaching out to like our local immigration nonprofits and things that we had in our community, and I just wasn't finding something. There just wasn't a spot for me. And I think in this, I found my place, and I hope a lot of people have found their place. That we are all smart and capable and willing to do this, and also how very cool that we get to build a community around it. Because I always like to say that I usually enter these spaces to like meet people first and make friends. Like, I always want to make friends, but then if it's like doing something great in the world on top of that, icing on the cake. So that was a really long intro. Today, We are going to talk about this idea of why it matters that Trump is in the files. I know it matters. Obviously, it matters. It sounds obvious. It sounds like, why question it? But in my life, I'm very often speaking to people on the other side of the aisle. I'm talking to people who voted for Donald Trump and who still support Donald Trump. And I maybe have a different perspective than a lot of people because I don't have this kind of like hard and cold blame for a lot of people, because I also know that they're seeing all this information through a different filter than what we're seeing, right? Whether that's Fox News, whether it's kind of these fringe right-wing websites, whether it's not on any kind of news at all and it's just through the word of mouth of their friends and family. They may not very well be seeing what we are seeing. Of course, everyone has access to the same information, but I try to be open-minded about the idea of people missing information and how can I help? How can I talk to somebody on a level? How can I speak from the heart and not be angry? This idea of like, I can't see family or I can't see friends or I can't sit down and have a meal with somebody because I'm angry at them. I really, really, really try to veer away from that. And the reason why it's important to me personally is because my mom is a very big Trump supporter. My dad is not. That they're like two different sides of the aisle, which has always been very fun. But my mom is also a person who raised me to love the people around me, to love people who look different than me, who spoke different than me, who came from around the world. I grew up with she had a giant shortwave radio over the kitchen sink where we got all our news and comedy and music in from like the CBC and like NPR. And I grew up on world music from every, corner of the earth. And so sometimes it's very confusing to me to be in this space to watch her support someone who really shrinks that down and says, everything else is evil and bad and criminal and these people from other places and other religions and other languages and people who haven't filled out that last piece of their immigration paperwork, they're putting your children at risk. It's hard for me to counter those two sides of my mom. And so a lot of the reasons why I do a lot of this stuff is because I hope that she hears it. And I know she listens to this. So, Mom, I love you. Here we go. There is something that I listen to that is called, it's a podcast called The Necessary Conversation. And I'm sure a lot of you guys have heard of it. It's with Chad Colchin and, if I'm pronouncing that right, and his sister Haley Pop. And Chad, I don't know if he was a comedian or is a comedian or he just traveled with comedians. He hung out with Will Sasso a lot from Mad TV, if you knew Mad TV. But their whole platform is they have a podcast where they talk to their parents. And their parents are big Trump supporters. And they basically present one issue at a time and they talk about every issue. And they let their parents speak, but they also show them, they say, okay, this is the information you got, but here's literally what this thing is. How do you feel about that? And it can be really triggering to watch, personally speaking. But I also relate to it a lot because I can see in their parents that they don't have all the information and they're very devoted to the thing that they believe. And it's also this idea that was really pushed in the very beginning of the Trump administration, that to be a Trump supporter or be a Republican, which originally it was the original Republican Party, which is vastly different now, was if you went to church and you were a Christian, you had to be a part of that party because of one singular issue. And that one singular issue was abortion. And so therefore, you could never, ever, ever vote Democratic because Democrats support the right to choose, whereas Republicans don't. And so that one singular issue brought an entire group of people into this idea of the MAGA party. But if you step back, and this is something I did years ago, and I did it for my friends who were asking me, because I also am a Christian. They said, how dare you vote for Obama? How could you vote for someone who supports the right to choose? And I said, well, look here. I'm a math person. I like stats. Let's figure out why. And I went through every abortion statistic, both from the CBC. Am I saying that? I'm trying to think. Whoever puts out all the abortion stats that literally shows all the numbers from every state every year. There's one that is governmental, and then there's one that's a private stat that is a lot of like churches and faith-based organizations use that stat. If you look at both of them and you make a graph for both of them, they show you that abortion went down at a significantly higher rate during Democratic presidents across the board since abortion was passed. And the reason for that is because of better access to healthcare, straight across the board. So you have people voting Republican in order to save babies, and yet during Republican presidencies, more people are getting abortions than during Democratic presidencies. And so I said, look, if this is an issue for you voting for a Democrat, then you need to know fewer people have abortions during Democratic presidents because they have greater access to healthcare. And that's just plain and simple. But then you have to look at the other things, like, objectively, if your point is you're saving the lives of children, at what age, right? Is it just before they're born? Because now you have all these systems in place that harm children after they're born. And those don't seem to be a problem. Like all these systems where kids are getting less food, where children are being separated from their parents. There's less oversight about abuse and foster care and things like that underneath the Republican administration. And yet abortion has been banned. But those two things don't coincide, right? If you're for the protection of children and the saving of children, that has to include children all the way up until their 18th birthday, right? But that's not the system that's in place. And so those were the things that I said. But also, kind of this idea, and this talk today is not fueled necessarily by those discussions with my family, but there's this idea that was shared around by Trump voters that, going back to the Epstein files, that when Jeffrey Epstein was first arrested in 2006, Donald Trump came forward and was all ready to help the Palm Beach police chief. His name is Michael Ryder. I checked in with very reliable sources in Palm Beach in journalism and law enforcement, and I said, how credible is Michael Ryder? Is he a credible person? Because I questioned the police department in Palm Beach. There have been issues when we talk about the investigation into Epstein down there. And I said, how credible is Michael Ryder? Is he somebody who's trustworthy? And the response I got was, Michael Ryder is credible to a fault. He is a very good police chief. And he is the one who told the FBI that when they arrested when they arrested Jeffrey Epstein, Donald Trump came to him and said, quote, I quote, everyone knows he's been doing this. And he thanked the officer for arresting Epstein. He encouraged him also to focus on Ghislaine Maxwell. And so now you have Republicans going, look, Donald Trump wanted Epstein arrested. He wanted to help. He's a good guy. Well, if you want to look at it that way, Donald Trump said everybody knew Epstein was doing this, and yet he didn't say anything until Epstein was arrested. If he knew, let's say he only knew, let's be really, really, really hypothetical here. Epstein and Trump broke up in 2004 when they both tried to buy the same house. Trump went behind Epstein's back, bought it with invisible money that he didn't have, and then flipped it and sold it to a Russian oligarch. They broke up. They broke up over that one real estate deal. That was 2 years before. So let's say just in those 2 years was the only time that Donald Trump knew Epstein was doing shady stuff. That was still 2 years that he didn't say anything. He said nothing. He didn't say anything to the police. He didn't say anything to any kind of law enforcement. He didn't call out anything. But we know it wasn't just 2 years. We know it was prior to 2004. We know that they were friends for 15 years. So now we're up to 17 years. 17 years where Donald Trump said nothing. He said nothing about Epstein's choices financially, his choices with young girls that were if you didn't know they were underage, they were meant to look underage because that was Epstein's preference. Donald Trump didn't say anything. He didn't say a single thing to anybody until Epstein was arrested. He heard Epstein was arrested, comes Trump down to the police department and goes, thanks, guys. Did the right thing. What a bad dude. Because now he's in jail and I don't want to be in jail with him. So I'm going to tell you he's a bad dude. But I never said anything in 17 years. So we're going to now launch into, and I was actually going to have a second topic. We're not going to have time for that. We're going to launch into some of these accusations about Donald Trump and why there is a focus on him. You hear a lot from MAGA, like, we shouldn't just focus on Donald Trump. And I say, correct. And I don't think we are, right? We're focusing on everybody. We're the ones saying that there's this huge list of horrible men and some women, both political parties, all very wealthy. But we shouldn't, I say back to them, we shouldn't not focus on Donald Trump. Donald Trump is so clearly in this investigation. And if he was innocent, he would be helping with the investigation. He would be providing information. He would be speaking up. He would be opening up the files to be investigated. But it's this constant shutting down. And so I wanted to go over why, prior to even knowing about the Epstein case, I knew that Donald Trump was a sexual abuser. And again, and I've said this 100 times, if you've listened to me before, it had a lot to do with the work that I used to do where I would listen to interviews. And during the Me Too movement, there were a lot of documentaries being made and books being written and, radio shows, podcasts, whatever, about women who had been abused by powerful men. And, a big one was Harvey Weinstein. Harvey Weinstein is in prison because he wasn't rich enough, right? He was a rich, powerful man, but he wasn't rich enough to stay out of jail. It's why you don't see Epstein in the Me Too movement. It's why Donald Trump was not canceled in the Me Too movement. Harvey Weinstein was not rich enough to not be canceled by the Me Too movement, and so he is in prison. But during that period of time, there were a lot of these roundtables, and you would just have discussions with rooms full of women. And some of these movies got made, some did not get made, but and some of these interviews were very, very off the record. They were not willing to say their names. They were not looking for any financial compensation. They felt that it was too late, but they had been asked by friends and family to come forward to speak in this moment. There were a lot of people who described being assaulted by Donald Trump, and they didn't want to approach Donald Trump about that. They didn't want to approach law enforcement about that. Which is very credible, on my end of things, because they're not seeking anything. They're just like afraid, but also have a story about the thing that happened to them. Interesting. I'm trying to think like ages and stages what I want to do with this. So I guess where we'll start is with the youngest, right? We have 3 13-year-old girls, and their 3 cases vary as far as what we have to prove their case. They kind of they kind of go in order of least provable to most provable. The least provable, the one we don't have as much about, that is only an FBI tip, and that is all we have, is kind of the one that's has been talked about quite a bit as being very, some of these more heinous stories. Was a 13-year-old girl in 1984 who had a baby, was pregnant. I don't think she identifies, I'm trying to think if she identifies who the father of the child is. I don't think she did, but she was being sex trafficked by Epstein. They were on a yacht in Mona Lake, Michigan. She says her uncle murdered the baby. She doesn't say who her uncle was, but she said she was also being sex trafficked by Trump, and that Trump was there when this child was thrown into the lake. There is separate email correspondence. I believe, now don't quote me on this, but I believe it's by Larry Summers, maybe? It's by one of those circle of men, talking about years later, Donald Trump standing by and watching a child die from neglect, which I found interesting, right? Two different places, two different stories saying roughly the same thing. So we have this case. The only thing we have from this case in 1984, 13-year-old girl, is an FBI, like an FBI tip, right? We don't have an FBI interview, we don't have depositions, we don't have a lawyer, we just have a tip. But it is in the files, and it came from August of 2020, but before Epstein died. The second one we have is much more well-known, is the Katie Johnson case, which can be confusing because it turned into a Jane Doe case. So Katie Johnson is a pseudonym. She first filed her case as a, now woman, but she was also a 13-year-old girl, saying that she had been abused and trafficked by Epstein and Trump. And then she withdrew her case because she had done it by herself. She didn't have a legal team. She'd made mistakes in the filing. And so she ended up withdrawing her case and refiling with a lawyer under the name Jane Doe. And I believe, I'd have to go back and look, but she did that at least 3 times total. Might have been 4, but every time she updated it, it was because she was either adding to her legal team or she was refiling from another location. So she originally started in California, and then they ended up filing in New York. That case, is, again, very heinous. She was a child. She was brought to Epstein's house, I believe, 3 times, abused by Donald Trump, not only sexually, but physically. She talks about there being a witness. The witness was able to corroborate the story, and she was going to come out and identify herself and have a press briefing, and then they had a hack in their system that was identified as, I believe, coming from Israel, that identified all their information on all their computers at the law firm and everything, and that scared her so badly that she withdrew everything and disappeared. She's safe. She's not like dead or something, but she is not willing to come forward any longer. They did not have an FBI interview with her, so she's sort of like middle of the road. But she was represented by a very credible law firm, which is the Bloom firm. Lisa Bloom is the daughter of Gloria Allred. So she's sort of like middle of the line. There's a lot of information on Katie Johnson. There is a lot of credibility to her case, but it only got to a certain point before it was withdrawn. Then you have this case that I've been working night and day on out of Hilton Head. And the Hilton Head case is another Jane Doe. She's Jane Doe 4, also 13. And this would have been in 1983, and it occurred in South Carolina. And I've gone through it quite a bit, but again, eventually brought up to New York and eventually abused by Donald Trump, and really significantly in a very similar manner to Katie Johnson. Their stories are very similar, which I found interesting because maybe this most recent Jane Doe would have had access to Katie Johnson's court records, but not likely, right? She likely wouldn't have been reading her, depositions and that kind of thing. So I found that interesting that their cases were read so similarly. And then also that this woman out of Hilton Head received a settlement from the Victim Compensation Fund, the Epstein Fund, which is not guaranteed guilt on the part of Jeffrey Epstein, but it says quite a bit if she was paid a settlement. That is, and we don't know how much she was paid, but that says something that she was paid out from that fund. So just with these cases, those 3 cases, I find it significant that they were all 13-year-olds. And this is something I've heard a little bit about Donald Trump before, like this idea of a younger girl, and he didn't have MOs necessarily like Epstein had MOs, but this is just something that you see as a pattern. You see these very younger girls. He was in charge of the Teen Miss USA pageants. Like he liked that idea of the very young girl, and there were very often very strange references to like his daughter that were inappropriate, that he said in front of her, he said on Howard Stern. And people can say like, oh, he was just being funny. Don't, haha, don't take it seriously. But all I can do is put myself in his shoes and be like, would I don't think I would ever joke like that. I know I wouldn't joke like that. I don't know anybody who would joke like that about their own child. It's just strange and just so inappropriate that it's, I don't know. Anyway, you have other cases. So I tried to highlight versus if they were under 18 versus over 18. The main thing with the under 18s, outside of these specific cases, which we are finding more and more cases as we go, would have to do with the Teen Miss USA pageants, and just the idea that he claimed, due to his being in charge of them, he had access to whatever he wanted on set, whatever he wanted behind the scenes. And a lot of that had to do with being in the dressing rooms with these young girls. And there are several, like many different women that came forward who were like, yeah, he was always in the dressing rooms when the girls had to get dressed because they had very quick changes. So it wasn't like they could wait until he left. He would kind of linger. And one girl said, I was 15 years old and I was undressed. And she said, I remember putting on my dress really quick because I was like, oh my God, there's a man in here. And Trump said, don't worry, ladies. I've seen it all before. They're all underage, obviously. So he's not in this instant attacking, groping, sexually abusing, but he's in a room with young girls dressing, and they did not want him there, obviously, and he shouldn't have been there. I had one more like that. Let me see. I think there was a large group of those. But then, okay. So then we go through these cases of younger women. I have spoken with one woman, and I won't name her here. I mean, she's listed, but I haven't asked permission if I could talk about her on here. But she described a very typical attack. I don't know how else to describe it from Trump. She was a model. She was very young, and this idea of, I guess Trump did have an MO. Trump's MO was to come up and forcefully kiss somebody without permission, and then very often reach underneath, if they had a dress, reach underneath their dress. And with this woman, she had just come to the US, which was often the case as well. And she said that he kept trying to lift her dress and was trying to kiss her all over, and she didn't give him permission. And you have to think about this idea of consent, where people go, yeah, but you didn't say no. You didn't say no. And it is not a woman's obligation to say no, to not give permission to a man, or to a partner, or to another person. Like, not saying no is never consent. You have to identify consent for there to be consent. None of these women did. So you have, starting out in the 80s, you have descriptions of constantly reaching up women's skirts. You have a woman named Jessica Leeds, who was 38. She was a flight attendant. He reached up her skirt. You have Ivana Trump, who claimed that he raped her and then withdrew her claim afterward. You have a woman named Kristen Anderson, who was an aspiring model. He grabbed her through her underwear. I'm sorry, this is a very triggering. I tried to say this on my other location. This is going to be triggering. It won't be graphic, but it will be triggering. You have a woman named Jill Harth in 1992, 22 years old, reached up her skirt, grabbed her by the crotch. You have Stacey Williams, 25. You have E. Jean Carroll. E. Jean Carroll was 52 years old. That was not unusual for him. They were not all very, very, very young women. Some of the women that I heard who wanted to stay off the record were older, right? They were older. They were often journalists. They often worked in circles that, business. And he would attack them. He would attack them, stairwells in restaurants, down by the bathrooms in theaters. Like, he'd always find a dark back area, push a woman against a wall, forcefully kiss her, and grab her up under her skirt. These are all so far before Me Too. These are all so far before me me knowing about the Epstein files, most people knowing about the Epstein files, this is the same thing he was doing over and over and over again. You had Amy Doris. Amy was 24. She was at the US Open. He forced his tongue down her throat. And she said he was very gropey, and I felt trapped. I was trying to get his arms off me, but I wasn't strong enough. You have Kathy Heller, who is 44 and attending a Mother's Day brunch with her family. He leaned down to the table and started kissing her, and a relative noticed, and he walked away and said he was very forceful and very aggressive. A woman named Temple Taggart McDowell was in the Miss USA pageant. He gave her a long and passionate kiss, and she said she wanted to turn and wipe her mouth. She was with a chaperone because she was only 21, and her chaperone was so uncomfortable that she told McDowell not to be alone with Trump. You have Karina Virginia, who was waiting for a car service when Donald Trump approached her, and he said, "Hey, look at this one. We haven't seen her before. Look at those legs." And he reached up, grabbed her arm, and then her breast. And when she flinched, he said, "Don't you know who I am?" And she got in the car and drove away. Again, these are not necessarily Epstein-style rape cases, but these are a consistent pattern with Donald Trump. Again, this is prior to what we have heard and known about Donald Trump. I continue. You have Karen Johnson, who is a former dancer. She was going to the bathroom at Mar-a-Lago, and he came up to her, forcibly kissed her against the walls, grabbed her by, trigger warning please, grabbed her by her genitals, and then he left messages on her phone for days after. And she said, "I was scared because of who he was. I don't know where it came from. I didn't have a say in the matter." You had Bridget Sullivan, who was 19 years old. We are only up to the year 2000. She was a contestant backstage at Miss USA. He walked in when everybody was naked, and she was warned about him. So this was another dressing room incident. He walked in, everybody was naked. She was warned about the people in charge, and don't let him hug you because he will grab you from behind. There was a long list of Miss USA contestants who said that he would come in, even though the security guard blocked him from entering their dressing room. He would barge in, and she said, "Mr. Trump just barged in, didn't say anything, stood there and stared at us. He didn't walk in and say, 'Oh, I'm sorry, I was looking for someone.' He walked in, he stood, and he stared, and he was doing it because he knew he could." Okay. Tasha Dixon was 18 years old. She's the former Miss Arizona. She said he would come in her dressing room, and she said it was their introduction to the owner of the pageant for him to walk in and her to be naked. And she said, "Who do you complain to? He owns the pageant. There's no one to complain to. Everyone works for him." Mindy McGillivray, 23 years old. She was attending a Ray Charles concert at Mar-a-Lago and felt someone in the crowd grab her bottom. She thought it was her friend's camera bag that might have pushed up against her, but when she turned, it was Donald Trump. He said nothing. He knew what he did. I could see his face, and I could see the look of guilt. And he walked away, and she turned to her friend, and I said, "Donald just grabbed my caboose." These are, okay. I'm going to stop there because for now, we're at 2003. Okay. I don't know how many women is that. How many is that? That is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 23 women by 2003. 2005 is when the Access Hollywood video was recorded. And we now know that most of us saw it in 2016 when that came out, but it was recorded in 2005. And in that video, if you go back and watch it, he talks about kissing women, whoever you want, forcefully kissing women and grabbing them by the pussy. he's not lying, right? He's not even like exaggerating. That is literally what many of these women said that he did to them, specifically in specific cases of women. Like, if I name these women, most of us don't know who they are. We've never heard of them because they weren't getting settlements, they weren't suing, they weren't writing books. They are just people who came forward and said, this is what Donald Trump did to me, by the way, and then kind of went back into anonymity, right? So they're not gaining anything by telling this. And again, many, many, many more were unnamed, right? There, I listened to them at these roundtables and they refused to come forward and name themselves because they were too scared, right? Yeah, I mean, who is willing to say that the president of the United States or a campaigning person for the president of the United States abused them? Like, you could lose everything. And so they weren't willing to do that. And that's 100% within their rights. But when he came forward with that video and he said that is what he likes to do, right? He told Billy Bush, who laughed it off nervously. But again, this idea of somebody being in the room when something terrible happens and they don't say anything, he was describing exactly what he did to these women and girls. I mean, he just was. Now we're to 2005. 2005, you have Natasha Stoynoff. She's a journalist for People magazine. She'd gone to Mar-a-Lago to interview Donald and Melania for their first wedding anniversary. When Melania went upstairs, Trump pushed her, forcibly kissing her. She said, Trump is much bigger than me, a looming figure. He was fast. He took me by surprise, and he threw me off balance. I was stunned. The butler walked in and informed them that Melania was on the way down the stairs. Trump looked at her and said, you know we're going to have an affair, don't you? Stoynoff told her editors she would never do a story about Donald Trump ever again, and she never did. Rachel Crooks was the receptionist. She's 22, a receptionist at the investment firm in Trump Tower, at an investment firm, so not necessarily working for him. She was in an elevator with Donald Trump, and he leaned over and just started kissing her in the elevator. And she said, it was so inappropriate. I was so upset that he thought I was so insignificant that he could do that. She returned to the desk and called her sister, who was shaken. And she said, are you sure he didn't just miss trying to kiss you on the cheek? And she said, no, he kissed me on the mouth. It's not normal. Days later, he requested her phone number to pass along to a modeling agency. And she spent the rest of her time avoiding him at that job. Again, Donald Trump was very involved with the modeling agency. And you know, today we got to see, again, Paolo Zampoli. Paolo Zampoli is back in the news, who was a good buddy of Donald Trump. And Paolo Zampoli is just a gross, disgusting guy who should be subpoenaed. But we read today that in a custody battle with his wife, he sent ICE after his wife, who was an immigrant. All these men had immigrant wives. Like, that was what they wanted to do. Hi, King Joseph. Are you here to listen about Trump? King Joseph is here to call me out as fake news. Well, enjoy, King Joseph. So you have this guy, Paolo Zampoli, who is one of the rumored people to have introduced Trump to Melania. The other person is obviously Jeffrey Epstein. Whoever they was, like, be that as it may, they were all in the same place at the same time. All horrible people, all involved with the modeling industry, all involved with trafficking, all involved with the Einstein visas that were bringing girls over to the US without the proper paperwork. And again, Epstein had his own Border Patrol people. You can see it in his emails. Like, they were just bringing girls in however they wanted to get them in, through art schools. Melania was in a photography school, brought into the modeling industry. You know, I've talked to people who said she wasn't supposed to be a model. She wasn't like this, you know, when we think of these supermodels of the 90s, she was never supermodel material. She was like very commercial. That probably wasn't her long-term plan. And she was in art school, and she was brought over with the Einstein visa and married to Donald Trump. She was an adult, but she went through the same system. Okay, we are up to Jessica Drake. Jessica Drake was a adult film star and sex education advocate. She was 32 years old. She was attending a charity golf tournament at Lake Tahoe when Trump invited her up to his suite. She felt uncomfortable, so she brought two friends. And while there, Trump hugged and kissed all three women without asking permission. Later, Drake received a phone call. I don't know why. Oh, sorry, Jessica Drake. So later, she received a phone call to come back to the suite for $10,000, along with a ride on his jet back to Los Angeles, and she declined. Okay, in 2006, Nini, I'm going to mispronounce this, Nini Laaksonen, she was 20. She was Miss Finland in 2006. She appeared with Donald Trump on The Late Show with David Letterman, so you can probably find clips of this. Just before going on stage, he reached back and he grabbed her bottom. She said, "He grabbed my butt. I don't think anyone saw it, but I flinched and I thought, what's happening?" Someone mentioned later that he liked her because she looked like his wife when she was younger. So he thought she looked like a young Melania. In 2010, an anonymous friend of CNN anchor Erin Burnett met Trump at the boardroom in Trump Tower. She said, "Trump took Tic Tacs, suggested that I take them also. He then leaned in, catching me off guard, and kissed me on the lips. I was really freaked out. After the meeting, Trump asked me to come to his office alone. Was really unsure what to do. Figured I could handle it myself. Anyway, once in his office, he kept telling me how special I am and gave me his cell number, asked me to call him, and I ran the hell out of there." Okay, so that was the friend of Erin Burnett from CNN. And I've heard that story before. We have Summer Zervos, who's 37 years old in 2011. She was a contestant on the 5th season of The Apprentice. He invited her to the Beverly Hills Hotel, and during that meeting, he started kissing her with an open mouth, grabbing her breast, and rubbing his penis on her. And she filed a defamation lawsuit in 2017 against Donald Trump, which moved forward until 2021, and then she suddenly withdrew the case without any compensation. And when I see somebody withdraw a case without compensation, I know that there's threats involved. And so, and that's just my opinion. I know that's allegedly, but like, you don't file a case for 4 years and then withdraw and not get anything out of it. There's a reason for that. 2013, Cassandra Searles was 24. She was Miss Washington. She was invited by Trump up to his hotel room. She said no, and he grabbed her bottom, except saying, and kept asking, he probably doesn't want me telling the story about the time he continually grabbed my ass and invited me to his hotel room. So, kind of a Harvey Weinstein-ish thing. And then Alva Johnson in 2016 was a former Trump staffer who was forcefully kissed on the lips in front of Pam Bondi. That's fun. I wanted to go back to E. Jean Carroll, because E. Jean Carroll is a case that we know pretty well. E. Jean Carroll was 52 years old when she was assaulted by Trump, and her case was kind of significant because it was a full sexual assault, and it was in the bathroom at Bergdorf's in New York. She was there. She didn't really know him, but I think they had kind of crossed paths because she was a journalist, and she was slightly well known in the world of journalism, and he always pays attention to like the news and what's being written about him. And so they were sort of like, they weren't flirting, but they were just like, ha 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 ha, in the elevator. And he ended up raping her in the bathroom of Bergdorf's. She immediately told a friend, this is key in a lot of these cases, is she immediately told her friend and said that she didn't want to go to the police, but she's like, this is what happened to me. And I believe I'm trying to think how she told it. Like, I believe she said that her friend was the one who identified it as rape. She's like, what you're describing to me is a rape. And E. Jean was like, unsure if that technically, what's the technical term for rape? And she's like, that's it. And so her friend, Lisa Birnbach, encouraged her to report the incident. She said, Jean, he raped you. You should go to the police. And she said, no, I don't want to. Eventually, she wrote an article about it where she discussed it. And then she filed a defamation lawsuit in 2019 because she couldn't charge him with rape, but she could say because she wrote that article, he defamed her and he damaged her reputation and obviously affected her ability to work for a while. I think she clearly has the upper hand now. So what she wrote in her article, this is just a, piece of her article, is decades ago, the now president of the United States raped me. When I had the courage to speak out about the attack, he defamed my character, accused me of lying for personal gain, and even insulted my appearance. No woman should have to face this. I have had the honor of spending time with Eugene. She's lovely. She's very funny. She was wearing like a orange flight suit. She's very stylish. She can turn things that shouldn't be stylish into something stylish. So I got to hear the entire case from her mouth, beginning to end. I recorded some of it and then I haven't posted it because I thought, it was sort of a personal interaction. So I don't know if I will ever post that. But one of the things we asked her after all that, because she won her case, and her case was not to determine if Trump sexually abused her. It was to determine that she was defamed enough that she lost work, had mental health issues as a result, a lot of counseling. But in so doing, the judge said that he felt that Trump had sexually abused her. That was not what they were arguing, but that is what the judge concluded from the case. And in so doing, he charged Donald Trump with $83.3 million. He has not paid a dime to E. Jean Carroll. She has not seen a penny of the $83.3 million that Trump owes her. And so when people say that she's a gold digger or that she is trying to ruin his reputation, like, she hasn't made any money. And if you ask her, she doesn't think she'll ever see the money. Like, she assumes she won't ever see the money. But it's the principle of him owning that he lost that case that is much more important to her. And just the moment of her walking out down the steps of the courthouse in defiance, that I feel that was probably more important to her. She's lovely. She's on Substack, so hopefully she gets her, she gets her day in the sun, which I think she has. So, okay. So anyway, as of right now, that is 33 sexual accusations against the President of the United States of America. 33. I can only, anybody who's watching or listening to this who sides politically with Donald Trump is going to see me as biased, and I can't do anything about that. And I can say until I'm blue in the face that if this was anybody that I ever voted for, even just one credible accusation, if there was a credible accusation that involved court documents, that involved people who came forward and asked for nothing, if there was anything, then we would be talking about it. This is 33 accusations that involve FBI interviews, that involve settlements from the Epstein Victim Compensation Fund, that involve court cases and lawsuits, and $83.3 million that has gone unpaid. This is a very long list. Oh, sorry, dressing room in Bergdorf. Thank you, Jim. I'll have to look that up because I thought it was the bathroom at Bergdorf's, but maybe it was the dressing room, or maybe I'm just mixing up the two. But this involves 33 women. Some were girls. 3 of them were 13. And so if we take a look, if we step back and we are not political about this, if we are not, if we are what we say, if we're an alien who landed on this planet without any bias, but yet knowing morality of how to treat one another, how would we look at this when somebody has 33 accusations? And you can say that, oh, people are all out to get Donald Trump. It's a witch hunt in all caps. Well, let's just see, shall we? All of these, except for 1, 2, 3, were reported before he ever ran for president. So, I mean, they were going after a guy from The Apprentice, like a reality TV guy. I mean, I'm not really sure. It wasn't political back then. So anyway, we're gonna ask some questions here, I think, because my job is not to convince, my job is just to convey the information that we have. Okay, so let's look at some questions. Yeah. Ivana did change the word rape to he violated her. She did. She withdrew her claim when she was interviewed afterwards. But it's a word we all know. I don't think any of us would use it flippantly. So I do question why she would use it in the first place. I have my ideas. Yeah, I'm an elitist. Ooh, we have some fun stuff in the comments today. Oh, okay. Sorry, I'm looking at questions. Does Ellie read the chat? Yes. I just saw that he patted an SS agent on the behind. Where did you see that? I don't know. I haven't heard about that. Maybe we'll start at the bottom. If you want to ask new questions, then I can kind of find them. Yeah, so yeah, we're waiting for Pam Bondi. She is going to be subpoenaed. I'm not expecting anything highly intelligent to come out of that. It will probably hear more about the stock market. Yes, we are looking at pardons. There's a lot of pardons that have been in place that we do not support. There is an email that is floating around, and I want to go back and find it. Where Epstein listed a long list of people that he thought Trump should give pardons to, and wouldn't you know that most of them got a pardon? And the one person on there who did not, which I found interesting, was Michael Cohen, but he thought Michael Cohen should get a pardon. How does my mom justify the accusations? I think my mom, well, I'll be objective here. It's not just my mom, it's lots of people. They don't know about most of these accusations, right? I don't think most of us knew these women's names and their stories. I had to go digging to find them because, again, they were not seeking anything. They weren't seeking compensation. They weren't seeking book deals. They very quietly reported what happened to them, and then they went back to their lives. There obviously are the major accusations. I think a lot of people spend time looking at this administration and the Epstein files and the things that they see and hear through a filter. And the filter is whatever filter benefits what they already believe the most. And so in this case, a lot of people watch Fox News. My mom does not watch Fox News, but, has other sources. And they tend to only read and hear and see the things that they already agree with, right? Whether they're not allowing themselves to be faced with alternate beliefs, alternate points of view. They're not allowed to consider that people they have followed, devotedly for years could fail them, right? Which is something we should all think about. Like, people are extremely fallible. And there could be any number of people that we look up to in any industry, in music and film and politics and our church or our kids' school or anything that could have done something terrible. And we cannot be so heavily aligned with people that we look the other way when there's actual evidence. And I'm not talking about internet meme evidence. I'm not talking about when people say, oh, look, Pam Bondi was hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. Here's the AI altered picture to prove it, right? Those things aren't true. But when you have actual, judge and jury documentation that's accessible to everyone, that's something to pay attention to. And you don't have to agree with everything, but you got to wonder why a single person, prior to running for president, prior to making, the administration what it is and the stance in politics, would have that many sexual abuse allegations against them. Why would somebody with so much money and power have that many accusations against them? Well, because a lot of that goes hand in hand. Not to say that everybody who's a billionaire is going to make these decisions, but so far in this case, they're not proving us wrong. Okay. He was known to be a creep in. Yeah, I hear that from a lot of people who are from New York. So Trish says he was known to be a creep in New York City well before The Apprentice. If you grew up in the tri-state area, this was common knowledge. Yes, 100% yes. I've met, since moving here, I've met a lot of people who grew up around here, and they all say the same thing. He did not have a good reputation for how he treated people, for his ethics in business and real estate and finance. People knew that he was a cheat. They knew that he and his father would do the cheapest possible version of something and charge the most for it. They knew that there was an incredible history of racism where they would ban people from their buildings who were of any different ethnic, skin color, because they thought that it brought the quality of their real estate down. We all remember the Central Park Five, where the 5 teenage boys were accused of raping a woman, a white woman who was running, who were completely uninvolved. Like, they were nowhere near the woman who was raped. And they were eventually all exonerated. But Trump took out a full-page ad calling for the death penalty of these 5 teenage boys, all Black. He absolutely took advantage of the Native Americans when he went and got all his casinos up in New York State. He screwed them out of a lot of money. He mistreated people. He just doesn't have a good reputation for being a kind person. And if you are somebody who has voted for him and who follows this idea that he became a Christian, or well, he's walking with a Bible and getting a photo op and all this stuff, I would ask you, at what point did you see his demeanor change? Because a lot of people, when they become born again of any religion, you see their demeanor change and you see them try harder to be good people, right? Because that sort of goes along with this idea of what they want out of a religion. Is they change their lives, they try to do better, they try to be better role models for their kids and their family in life. And I don't think I ever saw much of a change out of Donald Trump in the years that I have seen him on TV. He's stayed pretty steadfastly vitriolic. I don't know how else to describe him. So yeah, he's not very popular in New York. Most people didn't like him. What did we say? SS. I keep seeing something about an SS agent. What is this SS agent? Not meaning to put that there. I don't know. I don't know what it was. Sorry, guys. I don't have Lawrence, so I'm doing this flying by the seat of my pants. Dean's the SS agent. I don't know. I don't know what that is. Yeah, there's the Ivana story. I would recommend, if you don't know the full story of Ivana Trump, that is something to pay attention to. It puts into question kind of her last days. Some things are not true. Like, she was not cremated. So people talk about like the weight of her coffin. She wasn't cremated, but she was buried on Donald Trump's golf course, because guess what? A golf course pays less taxes, or sorry, a cemetery pays less taxes than a private golf course. So if you bury someone on a golf course, it is automatically deemed a cemetery and your taxes go down. So that's fun. Yeah, she was changed to force. Oh, another thing is he did not have Mein Kampf by the bed. That is something else people said, that she said he did have a book of Hitler's speeches by the bed that he read every night. So, I mean, basically the same thing. Yes, Epstein, and I don't know if Maxwell was, but Epstein for sure was engaging with the people who started up 4chan and QAnon, right? What was it? Christopher, something with a P. He was meeting with him 3 days before they launched. So, yay. All these great things about all these great people. Yeah. Oh yeah, the whole birtherism with Obama and Donald Trump. He's known for his racism. He's not a big fan of the races that aren't white. Okay. I'm sorry. not doing a very good job at this. Okay, we'll close up. It's 3 o'clock. Thank you guys for joining me today. I hope this wasn't too scattered. It's a very long and complicated bit of the story, and I wrote it out on my Substack a little more, I don't know, nicely and carefully and plotted out. So if you want to come look at my Substack, it's posted to my notes. But otherwise, thank you for joining me today. I hope you guys have a lovely Friday. Get some sun if you're somewhere sunny. And if you could go ahead, if you're here, if you follow Blue Amp, thank you so much for doing that. If not, their stuff's free. My stuff is free. So go ahead and give them a subscribe wherever you're getting this information. We kind of all come out of Substack probably as our home base, but many of you guys are probably watching this on another platform, so that's fine. But if you could give some kind of a subscribe or a share or a follow or something to Blue Amp and to mine, which is the Panicked Writer. And then for those who are paid subscribers, I'm really grateful. You don't have to be, it's paywall free, but you know, that keeps the little engine running. So thank you guys. Have a great Friday and we'll chat soon.